Everybody. So let me introduce Dan Callahan from Mozilla. He's going to talk about authentication. So please welcome him.
Thank you. So I want to start by telling you what Persona is. I'm here to tell you how Mozilla is trying to kill the password with a project called Mozilla Persona. All right, I don't even have to tell you why the password's bad. Persona is a federated open source login system, which is just another way of saying that it's a way to log into websites without the hassle of a different password on every site. What I'm about to show you works cross-browser. It'll work just the same on desktop as it does on mobile Safari, as it does on my Android, which means that Persona as a login system works everywhere for everyone. It's simple, it's open, and it's easy to implement. But I'd rather show you Persona than tell you about it. So I want to start by showing you what logging in with Persona looks like. I'm on the website of Ting, which is a virtual carrier operating on the Sprint network. This is from the guys that founded 2Cows. And when I log into my cell phone plan, when I log in to see what my account history looks like, because Ting supports Persona and because I use Persona, then when I click on the sign-in button, my browser shows me a pop-up that lists all of my email addresses. Persona identities are fundamentally email addresses. It's already a decentralized identifier. Everyone has one. Everyone knows it. And all I have to do is choose an address and click sign in. And a few seconds later, there's my account dashboard. I didn't have to type a password. And I get that same two-click experience on other sites that use Persona, like the Mozilla Developer Network. I click the sign in button. My browser presents me with a list of identities. I confirm my identity, or at least the identity I want to use on this site. And I'm logged in. 2 clicks, done. Dead simple. The nice thing about Persona, because the identities are email addresses, it's something that your users already have, and it's something that your database probably already has as well. You're probably already asking people for their email addresses. So when a site like the Mozilla Developer Network decided to transition from passwords to Persona, they didn't have to make a single schema change, because all the data they needed, an email address, was already there. That also means that everything I'm showing you doesn't carry any lock-in. If you want to go from Persona back to passwords, you can. You have an email address. It's a portable identifier. I know someone in the back is sitting there thinking, big deal, Dan. I have a password manager. I can log into sites with 2 clicks. But what's happening when I'm logging into the site, 1, 2, 3, done, with 2 clicks, Persona isn't managing a password for me. The protocol behind Persona completely eliminated the need for any sort of shared secret to exist between me and the sites I'm logging into. A password manager can't do that. A password manager can't get rid of passwords altogether. So if you were to take 123done's database and dump it right now, put it up on Pastebin, sure, you would reveal my email address and you would reveal my to-do list, but nowhere in that database is a shred of information even tangentially related to an authentication credential. So if that were to happen, if this database were to be breached, if it were to be posted online, Lloyd, the author of 123done, would have to send his users a very difficult email that lets them know about what's been leaked, lets them know about what information is out there. But he would never have to write the line that tells his users that the next time they come to his site, they're going to have to jump through hoops and reset their password. And he would never have to follow that line with an even more difficult line about how his users should probably go reset their password elsewhere if they've reused it. By choosing Persona instead of passwords, Lloyd's completely protected himself from that worst case scenario. There's one other really interesting property of Persona, and that's the idea that if it can identify you with an email address, and if you don't need to set a password with each site, you don't need to establish a secret, then you can actually skip over a lot of the normal authentication and registration process on sites. So sloblog.io, or slowblog.io, is a small blogging site that supports Persona. So when I sign in, I'm informed that there's no registration form. I'm almost ready. Just sign in using Mozilla Persona, and you're good to go. which means that with 2 clicks, one on the persona button, one to confirm an identity, I can have a blog instantiated for me, and I can start writing. I'm not going to do that right now. But that's really important because that allows Henrik, the author of slablog.io, to focus on building the best damn blogging platform he can without the distractions of also building an authentication system. And it lets him dramatically lower the bar for new users on his site. 2 clicks, and I have a blog. So that's Persona. But I'm doing this demo in Opera. I'm here from Mozilla, but we recognize that the web is bigger than any one browser. And so Persona works in Opera, Persona works just the same in Internet Explorer. If you go to a site that supports it, then with just 2 clicks, you can log in. 1, 2, done. Persona works everywhere the web works. No plugins. It's all based on open standards, all based on existing technology. So in this presentation, I'm going to tell you the story of Persona, the story of why Mozilla is here, the story of why Mozilla is trying to influence the world of authentication. I'm going to try to explain the protocol so you can trust what Mozilla is doing to replace the password. I'm going to tell you how you can implement Persona on your own site. Give your own users a 2-click experience. Drop your password column. Let's start with the story. Why is Mozilla here? The story of Persona is the story of Mozilla. Mozilla is a nonprofit, and its mission is encoded in a 10-point manifesto that was written during the heyday of the browser wars, a time when walls were popping up and threatening to split the internet into exclusive fiefdoms, into incompatible fiefdoms. The Mozilla Manifesto is 10 points that are crucial to the open web, that are crucial to user empowerment, to maintaining the sanctity of this public resource we have. And I want to highlight 2 of those points as they apply to Persona, as they apply to authentication. The second item in the Mozilla Manifesto is that the internet is a global public resource that must remain open and accessible. As of late, we're seeing trends, especially in the authentication and in the mobile space, that threaten that openness and threaten that accessibility. But point 5 resonates with me. Individuals must have the ability to shape their own experiences on the internet. And what is more central to your experience as a human than the ability to self-identify, than the ability to determine who you are and what it means to be you? So the manifesto was written for the internet, and it applies equally to the browser wars, to the mobile web, to authentication. This is a login screen from 1988, 1990, and you can recognize it as a login screen because it has those 2 text fields. My username at Prodigy, and my password. Fast forward a quarter of a century into the future, and this is what I see when I log into PyCon. You can recognize this as a login screen because it has those same 2 fields, an email and a password. How far we have come. But along the way, we decided that the password had to die. The password had to go because people can't handle passwords, and as anyone that has an account on LinkedIn found out, neither can companies. But what do we do? What do we do? This has been with us for over 2 decades. Well, started giving people buttons. You can sign into my site with Google and Facebook. But if I'm going to invite Facebook to the party, I should probably involve Twitter. And Google, well, Yahoo's still pretty big, and so is Microsoft. But maybe I want developers to log into my site, or job seekers, or maybe gamers, or maybe members of other social networks. And so pretty soon we have a problem on our hands. And it's not just the difficulty of choice of saying, well, I have an account with a dozen of these 100 providers, and how do I pick the right one for this site? How do I pick the same one when I come back later? That's a problem, but that's not the only problem. There are much more subtle issues with with this system that's threatening to replace the password, and could be worse. This is the login screen for 500 pixels. It's split in half. It divides its users into two classes. You can either log in with Facebook, Twitter, or Clout, or you can log in with an email and a password. Which means if I want to assert my own identity, if I want to say that I trust Google, or that I trust Microsoft, or that I trust my own domain, I also have to be saddled with the burden of managing a new password. And I also have to trust that 500 pixels is going to do the right thing. Why are we treating those users as a second class? Why can't we treat them all as one? Why can't we treat people equally? Because I can't choose Google. Google will be happy to have a button here, but then what if I wanted Yahoo? It's a race to the bottom. What I find particularly interesting here is Facebook, Twitter, Clout. I haven't previously run into a Clout login, so I clicked it to see what happens, and then I have to log in with Facebook or Twitter. So the future is here, and it's very fractal. But that's what we have. We're deciding that the password is so bad that we're willing to force a third party in between our sites and our users. We're willing to say that if you want to use my site, you have to abide by and you have to conform. Your identity has to conform to some predefined set of companies' ideas of what an identity is. And sometimes those companies don't like your identity. Google and Facebook both have real name policies and will actively shut down accounts if you try to identify as something other than what's on your ID, or something that you're commonly known as and can submit supporting evidence for. But it's what we've got. How do we fix that? How do we stop treating people as two different classes of users, those that can force their identity into a box in order to get away from the password, and those that can choose who they trust, but have to take on the burden of a password? The problem with this system is that there's a lot of money in being one of these buttons. There's a lot of money in being seen as someone's identity. My Facebook is my identity, right? I can only have one account. I can't separate personal and business. So it must be me, right? I shouldn't have any problem with that. There's a lot of money in having that sort of lock-in and having your button on as many pages as you can possibly get it on. So if anything's going to change in this ecosystem, it has to come from outside. It has to come from someone that's not trying to make a buck off your every login. Think back to the Mozilla mission. Mozilla's a nonprofit. We're not trying to monetize your identity. And so when you think about what change could look like, I think it looks a lot like Persona. A single button that works with any email address, that treats people as equals. A button that encourages user privacy, that instead of intimately involving my email provider or my identity provider in a login transaction, something that keeps them at arm's length and doesn't let them see where I go when I log in. A single button that lets you sweep away all the clutter that would make NASCAR proud. That's Persona. So how does it work? One thing I showed you in the beginning screencast was what Persona looked like for someone that had already been using Persona. In all those cases, my browser knew who I was, knew to present me with the choice between my Gmail account and my Mozilla.com account. This is what Persona looks like if I've never used it before. Here I am at the Times of London's crossword page. This is live in production. You can go and do a crossword and have it be powered by Persona right now. And when I click the login button, I see a pop-up that's very similar to the one that I saw at the beginning of the talk. But my browser doesn't know who I am. I'm a fresh user. I've never seen Persona before. But I can understand this prompt. Crossword.thetimes.co.uk uses Persona instead of usernames to sign me in. To sign in with Persona, please enter your email address. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to type in dan@id.me, which is just a testing service that the Persona devs have created. It's a brand new address. So when I click next, notice that my browser says that it's checking with my email provider. It's going out and saying, hey, ID me, do you speak the Persona protocol? And good news, it does. I'll cover what happens if it doesn't in a minute, but for now, it does. So all I have to do is sign in with my email provider, and when I verify my account there, I can be signed into the crossword. I click the blue button, and now I'm on a page hosted by my email provider that I've seen a million times before. This is a completely standard login page, and it can do whatever my email provider wants to do to authenticate me. It could ask for a password, it could ask for a second factor, it could turn on my webcam and do facial recognition if it wanted. It's completely up to me and my identity provider how that authentication happens. But when I sign in, my address has been verified, some crypto is happening behind the scenes, and after a little bit of network latency, I'm logged in. I only have to do that once per address per browser, not once per site. So when I go to other sites that use Persona now, my browser knows who I am, and it has proof of my identity. So I get that same two-click experience that you saw in the beginning. That's Persona for a first-time user. But how is this better than the existing system? Sure, the user experience is good. Sure, I told you that Mozilla is protecting your privacy. But what's actually happening? As you saw, there were three parties. There was the browser, my email provider, and the site I was trying to log into. And to help kind of understand this, I want to bring two members of the identity team up on stage to act out the Persona protocol. I'm going to play the role of the browser. Brian Warner is going to play the role of the Times of London crossword. And Ryan Kelly will play the role of my email provider. The first thing you saw when I logged in to the Times was my browser went to my email provider and authenticated. I want to prove that I am Dan at id.me to Brian, but he's not going to trust me just on my word alone. I need some proof from my email provider. So I have a little piece of paper, a note that says, hey, I'm Dan at ID.me. I'll go and present this to my email provider and say, hey, ID.me, if you agree that I really am that person, will you please sign this document? And ID.me will say, well, maybe. What's your password? It's puppies. And it is. So ID.me is willing to sign this statement of identity for me. And we're going to represent that signature with a padlock, just because it's fun to have nice little physical objects. But I have this claim, I am Dan at ID.me, and it's backed up by ID.me's word, by their signature. So when I want to log into a website, I can keep this. I can make as many copies of it as I want. I don't have to go back until it expires. I can go and present it to the site I want to log into, along with a little bit of additional information that prevents replay attacks. And the Times of London scrutinizes the document and says, well, everything looks like it's in order, but how do I know that this is a legitimate ID.me signature? So before the crossword can log me in, it needs to verify that that signature matches the email provider's public key. So the crossword goes over, fetches a public key, it can cache it. So if the crossword has seen other ID.me users, it wouldn't even have to do that step. And it checks the signature against the public key, finds out that it matches, and I can be logged in. I can access my crosswords. Thank you. So that's the authentication flow. What's interesting is because those documents can be cached, I'm not going back to my email provider every time and telling them, hey, I want to log into the Times. Hey, I want to log into Ting. Hey, I want to log into Bugzilla. You do that once without telling them where you're going. You can log in without them revealing who's coming to their site either. Very privacy protecting. It's great. It's actually pretty simple to implement, but we'll get to that in a second. I glossed over the fact that in these first two steps, what happened if I had gone to my email provider and said, hey, would you please sign this? But no one was there at the nice agreed upon protocol point where they were going to sign. Like Persona says that there should be somebody here willing to sign. So if I go to Gmail and say, Gmail, will you please sign my Gmail address? Gmail will say, I don't know how to do that. I don't speak that protocol yet. But you saw me use a Gmail address at the beginning, so how did that work? If your email provider doesn't support Persona, if a domain doesn't support Persona, then as an optional, temporary part of the protocol, you can fall back and ask Mozilla to vouch for you instead of your email provider. So you say, hey, Gmail, will you sign for me? Gmail says, I don't know how. Well, hey, Mozilla, will you vouch for me until Gmail can? Well, of course. And so Mozilla will send you a challenge email. You click on that link, demonstrates that you have access to that address, and then Mozilla is willing to vouch for you. But as a developer that's building sites that are sites that are going to accept Persona as an authentication system, you don't need to worry about that. The protocol takes care of it. What you need to worry about is accepting that certificate, which we refer to as an identity assertion, and validating it. If you want to know more about the public key crypto aspects, LVH has a talk next door after the break on Crypto 101 that I would highly recommend. But anyways, you have to worry about steps 3 and 4. What do you actually have to do for steps 3 and 4? You only have to do one thing, and that's read the docs. At developer.mozilla.org/persona, if the only thing you take away from this talk is that URL, developer.mozilla.org/persona, then that's all you need. I'll be happy. Because when you go to developer.mozilla.org/persona, and you read the docs that are posted on developer.mozilla.org/persona, then developer.mozilla.org/persona will tell you to do 4 things. 1, include a JavaScript library in your pages. 2, hook up your login and logout buttons. 3, configure Persona. These 3 steps all happen in your front end, all happen on your template language, or in your templating language. 4, accept and verify assertions, accept and verify those credentials. Turns out this is really easy. Step 1, add a script tag that points to login.persona.org/include.js. Step 2, when somebody clicks on the login button, invoke navigator.id.request. Step 2, when somebody clicks on the logout button, invoke navigator.id.logout. This is literally all you need. You don't need to pass parameters to these functions. But where did they come from? JavaScript library. Persona is built on open standards. It's our hope that in the future, browsers will implement these APIs natively. Mozilla itself will be starting with the Firefox OS phones that are due out this summer. But for now, that JavaScript library allows Persona to work anywhere the web works today. So it defines id.request, id.logout, and it defines id.watch, which is where you configure Persona and tell it what to do in response to a login or a logout. You have to tell it 3 things. Who the current user is, based on your own sessions, what to do in response to login, what to do in response to logout. Login user is simple. You're managing your own sessions. You have a session cookie. This page is being rendered for alice@example.com, or this person has a session cookie for bob@foobar.test. Or I don't recognize this person, so I'll set it to null. All you're doing is telling Persona what the state is on your site so it knows whether or not to fire an on-login or an on-logout action for the user, or whether or not something's going weird. On login's really easy. Somebody wants to log in. You have to accept that assertion, you have to accept that signed credential, and hand it to your backend for verification. You don't want to do this verification in the browser because you can't trust that environment. So you have to do this on the server side. So you just accept the assertion and post it to your backend. In this case, I'm using jQuery and posting to a path at /login. You could do whatever you want, but I'm not modifying the assertion. I'm not having to mess with it at all. It's just a string. And once that works, if that's successful, I'll just reload the page because the response will have set a session cookie in my user's browser. If it's not successful, I'll call id.logout to kind of put the brakes on things, go back to square one, and wipe the slate clean. Logout's really easy. The user wants to log out, tear down their session. You're probably already doing this somewhere on your site. In this case, I could just post to /logout, and when it's done, reload the page. That's actually the entirety of the front end. Everything I showed you is all you have to do on your front end to support Persona. It's less than 30 lines. But you have to implement those 2 paths, the login and the logout path. Again, logout, you probably already have something that'll work without any modification. This is a complete logout path written with Django. Somebody post to it, clear the session, return a response, done. Login gets a little more complex. Again, I'm using Flask. I'm going to use the requests library for this. But so my backend has received the assertion, and now I need to actually verify all the signatures in it. You can do this completely locally. You're able to do this without talking to any third party, much like I completed that login transaction without Mozilla ever being involved, without any third party other than my email provider and the site I wanted to go into, the Times, being involved. But If you don't want to implement the signature verification yourself, you can actually hand it over to a service that Mozilla runs for convenience. It's open source, where you basically just hand it your assertion and who you are. So in this case, my assertion came in the post, and I am example.com port 443. That audience parameter is crucial because that's how you're able to tell if the assertion was really destined for your site or if it's a replay from another site. All I have to do is post that to verifier.login.persona.org/verify, and I'll get back JSON. And it's very, very simple JSON too. All I have to care about are 2 out of 5 keys. Status will be okay if all the signatures and the audience check out. Email will be who the user just verified themselves as. If both of those things are there, I can log the user in. So I'll check. If status is not okay, abort. Otherwise, set session.email to the user's email. Done. That's a complete persona integration, a complete persona implementation from scratch, 30 lines of code. You can do it in one afternoon. We've had actual businesses implement persona in 15, 20 minutes. Most people take a little longer, but it's actually happened. And to prove it, I'm going to do it on stage right now. Dear God, I hope I'm connected to Wi-Fi. Am I? Yeah. Oh, look at all those bars. This is going to be great. So here's a really basic Flask app. I have one route, the root route, that just renders index.html. This is all index.html is. If session.email has something in it, say you're currently logged in as session.email, and give the person a sign out button. Otherwise, you're not currently logged in, here's a sign in button. So that's where we're going to start. And to prove to you that those slides I just walked you through are all you actually need, I'm actually going to copy and paste from those slides the script tag, the login, logout buttons, and then navigator.id.watch, the configuration step. So all that's in there. The only change I made is I'm having my template dynamically insert session.email, and then if that's blank, if that's empty, the OR sets it to null. So it says, oh, nobody's logged in. But that's the entirety of my page. And so now, if I come over to my browser, I refresh, and try sign in, I get the pop-up. We're done with the front end, but there's no login and logout path, so I'm not going to submit this yet. There's nothing for it to actually do. So let's go to the other tab, and let's look back at the Python file. Again, here is the code, the exact same code that you saw on my slides. Copy it out. Paste it in. I made the change to the audience to localhost 5000 because that's what I'm running Flask on right now. Everything else is completely verbatim to what you saw. And so now, refresh the page, hit sign in. My browser prompts me for an identity. I could add another address if I wanted to, but it's my Gmail. I'm logged in. So again, just to zoom out for a second, this is the entire code. Set no wrap. Each pane is about 38 lines, including whitespace, including comments. That is the only thing that you're seeing right now, and you have a completely working public key crypto-based authentication system in under 80 lines of code. That's Persona. Not only is it a great user experience, it's an amazing developer experience. And I'm so glad that worked. So I want to leave you with 3 tips, things that Mozilla's learned from building Persona, dogfooding it within our own sites, on Bugzilla, on Air Mozilla, on Open Badges. The first tip, please, please, please use, or even better, make a reusable library. I was able to do that whole site in 40 lines, or 80 lines, because Flask doesn't have a lot of preconceived notions of things like CSRF protections or what a session is supposed to look like, or what a user is supposed to look like. If you're using a more feature-filled framework like Django or Pyramid, integrating persona takes a little more finesse to make sure that you're marrying those two concepts in a way that doesn't let things fall through the cracks. Mozilla maintains Django Browser ID. Browser ID is the name of the open protocol underlying Persona. Persona is the reference implementation. And we're using that all over internally. I believe there's also a high-quality Pyramid library, and I've heard of a Flask library or two, but I'm not sure, honestly, why you need it yet. The big room for the libraries is going to be this part, the authentication. I was posting to a central verifier. In the future, Mozilla doesn't want to be in that business. We want you to do the verification on your own. It's better for the health of the internet. It's better for the openness of the system. But for now, do that. If you're determined to make your own implementation, to build your own integration, please, please, please use the requests library. By default, Python's not going to check SSL certs on connections. URL-lib and HTTP-lib just silently let you get man in the middle. Request doesn't. Please use that. It's also just a fantastic API on its own merit. But lastly, do something nice for your users. Improve the UX. Combine your sign up and your sign in buttons. There's a website called Voost that does a really great job of this. Voost lets me register for cycling events in my area. And so when I go to log in with Persona there, click the sign in button. I'm given a choice between Facebook or Persona. You don't have to throw out all the buttons if you don't want to. Just merely suggesting that maybe you should. But when I click on Persona, I'll get that same pop-up you've seen. I'll choose an email address, but I'll choose an email address that Voost has never seen. They've never seen me log in with my work address. So they'll verify the assertion. They'll say, yeah, this person wants to log in, but we don't have an account for that person. And so instead of failing, they send me to an account creation page. So they only needed that one button to handle sign up and sign in. And they can tailor this account creation page to what they need to know. It's a cycling app, or a cycling website. They need to know my age, my gender, my location, so they can show me relevant events. To bring it a little closer to home, if PyCon had done the same thing, that 6-field registration form that we all had to fill out, it could have just been those. So we don't need the 2 email fields. Persona took care of that. We don't need the 2 password fields. Persona took care of that. We just need the name. What would you rather ask your users to fill out? What would you rather fill out as a user? Huh? So before I go, I have one small request to make. It's actually one request with 3 parts, but saying one request makes it seem more palatable. Spend 1 hour with Persona this week, just 1 hour. I added it to a site, albeit a tiny skeletal demo site, in the middle of a presentation. You can add it to your site in an hour. But maybe you don't have a site if you're busy. Just go and use Persona somewhere. Log into the Times. Do a crossword. And if you do that, tell me about your experience. I'll be here through the entirety of the sprints. My contact info is on the next slide. I've got stickers and business cards up here. Feel free to take one. Persona's ready for production use. You saw Ting using it. You saw the Times of London using it. Mozilla's using it internally. The Born This Way Foundation recently used Persona for a bus tour for its registration. It's ready to go, but it's still in beta. It's still able to be shaped by your feedback. And more than just being able to be shaped by your feedback, it's necessary that the people in this room help us get this right. Because without your voices, without your input, both as users and implementers, we're not going to build the future of the web. We're not going to be able to influence the web. We can't do this alone. But if you think we're on the right path, I want to ask you to go to one site that you use regularly. Send them an email and just say, hey, have you thought about supporting Persona? I don't want to manage another password. I don't want to be forced to sign in with this social network. Because that's how we're going to change the future of the web. That's how we're going to make it better for everyone, not just for the few of us that can understand OpenID or the few of us that can understand a password manager. We have to do this for everyone. Happy to take questions. There's a mic in the middle. Again, I have stickers, and I'm going to be around for the sprints. My contact info, I'm at Callahan on Twitter. Website's dancallahan.info, and you can email me at dcallahan@mozilla.com. Thank you. Oh, and quick shout out to folks that post their photos with Creative Commons licenses. Thank you very much to those guys.
Hi, great talk. With one of the advantages of the social media sign-ins, you lose the privacy, but for example, on the PyCon login example, instead of having to tell your name, you can pull that information in from the social site. Mm-hmm. Is there any consideration of that balance, of a way to make that optionally something that can be enabled? Is there a trade-off there that can be met?
Yeah, that's actually been kind of a long-term wish list feature for the team. We've been kind of hung up on the user experience behind adding a name or optionally a photo to the login. So we want to focus right now on getting the developer experience and the integration experience right, and getting the fundamental authentication experience solid before we start trying to expand into other pieces of information. So it's coming at some point, just probably not for a few months.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
What sort of protections are there against somebody else having physical access to my computer?
So right now, the key material, your browser holds a public-private key pair in HTML5 local storage. Once browsers natively integrate Persona, we'll be able to use slightly more secure storage, perhaps put it behind a master password or some other sort of authentication. But right now, if somebody owns your physical box, it's kind of game over, at least for that signed certificate. One way we're trying to mitigate that is by only issuing certificates for a very short duration. The first cert you get from your identity provider is good for, I believe, 1 hour or a few minutes. And then we'll re-up that if you keep using that address. You're never holding key material that's good for more than 24 hours as part of the protocol. So we're really trying to say, instead of the key being your identity is relying or rooted at your email provider at whatever domain. You can certify yourself if you run your own domain. And you just kind of go back there and re-auth to keep things fresh so we don't have to deal with blacklists or expiration.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Hello, thank you very much for the talk. Can you comment on mobile apps and how Persona, are there any specific plans to enable Persona for mobile apps? A lot of big companies have, they need to support authentication on all platforms. So if Persona is not available there, that would make it harder for them to adopt.
So it's possible to build Persona into mobile apps. Mozilla had an open source app called Pancake that did that. It's not easy yet. Basically, it relies on embedding a UI web view and using some APIs that that I didn't cover. We're hoping to make that cleaner, but we just don't have the manpower. We would welcome contributions. Persona's open source, github.com/mozilla/browser ID. If you have ideas for how we can make that easier for native apps, that'd be great. But anywhere that you can run and embed a web runtime, it is possible to do Persona. Oh, apparently the first version of the iOS SDK is up. Email me and I will pass you a link. Thanks, Brian.
I have two hopefully quick questions. Number one is, how do you deal with an account that's been compromised and there are outstanding tokens for that account that are being used for authentication? Is there any way for the user to revoke those?
Sort of. Brian could speak more to this. He's the guy that played the Times crossword sitting in front. It's just talking to him afterwards. But in brief, we're trying to manage that by limiting the duration that credentials are issued for. So again, you're never at risk for more than 24 hours as part of the protocol, and we're thinking about clamping that down even shorter. But we don't have a means to revoke certs that works in a decentralized manner.
Okay. My other quick question is it possible to use Persona without having to include the Mozilla JavaScript file on my site? So can I host that locally and then only go to Mozilla when the user actually wants to authenticate and they've clicked the button?
It's possible. Again, in the future, when browsers include it natively, you won't have to host that at all. But self-hosting, we don't recommend yet because the API is still in a slight degree of flux. If you're willing to hang out on our mailing list, then sure, self-host away and just watch for when it changes.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for the talk. I missed the very beginning. Does this work on all desktop browsers? Did I understand that correctly? Modern desktop browsers, HTML5?
Absolutely. We actively support Chrome, Firefox, obviously, Internet Explorer, and Opera. The Presto version, the WebKit version also works. On mobile Safari works. On Android, almost any browser you can find will work. There are some issues with the way Apple handles embedded UI web views with Chrome and alternate browsers on iOS that prevents us from doing the communication, the transfer of the signed material back into the calling window. So we don't work there, but then again, you can't change your default browser on iOS, so go figure.
And I just wanted to clarify one of the things you had said. I had looked at implementing Auth with Persona on one of my sites, and when I was reading through it, I very much got the feeling that it was not ready for production. From reading the warnings in the documentation about changes that could be coming up, and you shouldn't be relying on these libraries, and make sure you're sourcing it from Mozilla's site for the JavaScript. But it sounds like that it's more of a, and I'll call it a Google beta, kind of like how Gmail was in beta for how many years?
Yeah, more or less. There's still some infrastructure things we want to resolve before we actually go out and say we're out of beta and we're ready to go. There are some failure modes where our database has a single point of failure. So we're working on improving reliability and availability before we actually go out and say, yes, please use this. But we're processing tens of thousands of logins a day right now. The APIs I showed you, request, logout, and watch, we will not change the semantics of those. We will maintain backwards compatibility, and we'll give you at least 6 to 12 months of notice before any changes. So we're using it in production. Times of London's using it in production. Ting's using it in production. It's more or less ready.
All right, thank you.
My name's Eloy. Thank you for doing this just in general. I can't wait for the day where I can just kind of walk anywhere and not have to present credentials. I just want to be identified. I can't wait for that.
Step 3.
Step 3, there you go.
Be the change.
Be the change. I have a question, 2 parts. You showed us your prompt if you don't have, if you're not using Persona yet. Mm-hmm. To us, it's okay, or to me, it's okay. It looks great. Yeah. But I think to a lot of people, maybe older than I am, they would see this as a very foreign object, and they would kind of feel like their relationship with the website might be compromised. In other words, I'm not comfortable with this. I don't want to click this button anymore. Is there any way for us with your API to identify whether or not they already have a Persona account and then only prompt them if they do? In other words, I like the product, but I don't want to be the one to sell it. I would like another website to have converted them, and if they already have the account, I would like for them to be able to use it. Does that exist?
I think there may be a way to detect that. Okay. No, that wouldn't work. We've been talking about exposing that as an explicit API.
Okay.
I personally have reservations around saying, oh yeah, put this button on your page, but only show it to people that know what Persona is, because that kind of undermines the selling point that we actually are very easy.
It does, yeah.
Voost, when you think about Voost demographics, they're targeting cyclists, not a traditionally, programmery, tech-savvy bunch, or not necessarily that audience. And they only had Facebook, and they were de-emphasizing Persona, and they actually got a lot of pushback from their users until they put the two on the same level and did a little bit of education where they say, hey, let's see, go back here. So there's an alternate way to sign in with your email address. When they click the dialog, you see the Voost logo, so there's continuity. If it loads, yeah. So you can insert some of your branding into the dialog to help that.
And that was going to be my second question. Is there any way that we could completely skin this so that it does look more native and then makes our customers more comfortable with actually transitioning over?
That's a common feature request. I think we've not yet implemented it because of concerns around how that would integrate with native implementations of the API. Mm-hmm. But right now we do support having a human readable name and having your logo if you'd like it. And I think if nothing else, having something where it's like, here's a hue to tint the dialogue would be a good step in the right direction.
Cool. Thank you.
Hello. Are we out of time for questions? One more? Okay.
I've got 2 questions. I'll try to at least get the first one in. Is there a fallback for users who've disabled JavaScript in their browser?
No, there isn't. Persona fundamentally needs a JavaScript runtime right now.
Okay. And then hopefully I've got enough time for this second one. If you've used Persona before to log into a site, it knows one of your email addresses, but it doesn't know your other one. Is there a way you can tell which email address you've used on a particular site before, so you don't accidentally create a new account?
Yeah, Persona actually.
I think you might have been bolding it or something.
Yeah. So every time I logged in this first demo, you can see that it's bolded and pre-selected the address that I used the last time. So we remember that. So if you have a list of 10, 15 addresses, it's just a 2-click operation.
Okay.
Thank you. And so I think that's all the time we have. There's a break afterwards, so I'm happy to hang around. You can still ask me the question, and I'll give you a sticker. People should come and take stickers. But otherwise, thank you so much. Please implement Persona.